Hey, everybody, it's Reggie with Lawyer Interviews. And on today's episode, we have the honor of talking with Greg Mcfarlane, who is a seasoned trial attorney out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Greg shares with us some amazing experiences over his 2 decades of practicing, as well as shares some interesting stories about some cases he had involving some criminal sexual misconduct cases, as well as when he wanted to be an attorney because of his own interactions as being a Black man in America. So please enjoy this episode and thanks for watching. Hey, everybody, it's Reggie with Lawyer Interviews. Today's lawyer interview is being sponsored by the team at #LawTegic and Select America's Legal Elite in Media. So we'd like to thank our sponsors and welcome to the show. Today, we have the honor of talking to Mr. Greg Mcfarlane, who is an attorney out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hi, Greg, how are you?
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. And Greg, we talked a little bit. I know that you've had, you just mentioned 20 years of practice. So, you're an OG in the legal field. So I'd love you to tell our viewers what you practice.
Oh, so I actually started practicing criminal defense work. I started in the public defender's office in Miami-Dade County. I will still say it's probably my favorite job that I've ever had, even though I'm in solo practice now. And so it was mostly criminal defense. When I started my practice, I was doing most of criminal work, and then slowly kind of fell into the area of personal injury as well. And strangely, the personal injury is actually overtaking the criminal practice, but I always still do criminal work because it keeps you sharp, is the only way I can say it. Sometimes a personal injury won't get you in the courtroom as often, and I like to be in the courtroom, so.
Awesome. So you're a trial lawyer at heart.
Yes, I don't feel like I'm doing anything unless I'm in the courtroom, at least sometimes. This pandemic was very difficult because, trial skills are like riding a bicycle. You don't really forget them, but you can get a little bit rusty. So being out to the courtroom for so long has been difficult, but now we're getting back in, so I'm happy about that. Yes,
absolutely. I had that experience as well. I had my first in-person trial last fall, late fall, and I was like, I can't remember. what do I do here? What was it like going back into the courtroom for the first time for you? Did you have any nerves or anything, or were you?
I had a lot of almost trials, which happens a lot sometimes, but it was good. It was good to get to see all the faces again. And I mean, there's support staff, there's the bailiff, there is the clerk, all these people that you usually see, but we just didn't see them at all for the last 2 years. So it was nice to reconnect with those people. And I mean, sometimes you just have an off question on some case, and you might just run into a friend of yours that you're like, hey, by the way, do you know what you want to do with blah, 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 blah. So it was really good to be able to have those interactions back again. And of course, I mean, I love trials. So just the fact that we're able to have them again, I'm very excited.
That's so I'm glad too. I'm glad to be back in person. And there's such a decorum of the court, and you don't really feel that on Zoom or Web or WebEx, at least in my opinion. But I don't know if you feel the same. But I'm like, this doesn't feel like as formal.
Right, and that bleeds into the work. Like, they might not be obvious, but it bleeds into the work because there's sometimes when I need a judge to really understand this is something serious, and if the other guy's not in a suit, shall we say, it's hard to get this formality. And I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, I use my emotions. So if I look visibly upset, it's on purpose usually. But I'm trying to get the seriousness of the matter that I'm arguing. So sometimes you have to kind of portray that outwardly to get that. And it is more difficult in a Zoom setting rather than a courtroom setting. So I'll agree with you there. Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you get a little area right here to, I mean, at the end of the day, I think anyway, litigators are kind of actors, you act in the courtroom a little bit to tell a story. We're storytellers. And so, when you only have this box to do that, it's a little bit more difficult, to a judge or jury, depending on what kind of trial you have.
Right, and you don't get like what you're doing. You don't get all this animation and all this stuff that got more gesturing when I'm talking, but it looks different when you're doing it like this.
Yeah, it's a little distracting to gesticulate with your hands.
Right. So, I'm there with you. So like I said, the funny thing is, when I found out that I really did love trial work, it wasn't it was my wife who told me. And the reason that I found out was like every time before a trial, I'd get in so many, I'm like, oh, I want to, I'm going to win this, and all of that stuff. But the minute the trial would start, then I'd turn to a completely different person, and she'd say, "You only remember the beginning. You never remember the in between part where you're like, oh, I can't wait to go tomorrow. That person doesn't know what you're doing. I can't wait to go in." And she said, "Dude, you obviously love it. I don't know why you have this whole pre thing." And what I tell her is that, well, that pre-nervousness is what keeps me sharp, because of the minute I'm not a little bit nervous to go into that courtroom, maybe I'm not as prepared. So I want to make sure I've done every single thing that I can possibly do to be ready. But yeah, I love it.
I completely agree. And in court, the unexpected always happens. Like I swear gravity works in the opposite way in the courtroom. It can work a million times. And in the courtroom, it's going to, even your media is just not going to work. It's going to, so you have to be able to like roll with the punches and be able to be on your feet. So the more prepared you can be, the better, because there's still going to be unexpected. So
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit more about what it was like, for 20 years, from when you began trial work to now. Like, how do you feel you've grown as an advocate for your clients? How do you feel you've grown as a presenter to a jury, a storyteller?
I think I gave some of that away just a little while ago. I've being a little bit wiser. I'm not going to say older. I'm going to say wiser. So being a little bit wiser, I have better control over myself and my body and my emotions. And I really try to use every piece of everything that I'm doing to help my client.
Right.
So if I'm angry, I'm visibly angry, but I'm angry on purpose.
Right.
But to compare that to how I was as a young litigator, I don't know if one is necessarily better than the other. When you're a young litigator, there's a lot of energy involved, and you have the energy to do a lot more stuff. And that's helpful in some cases, but as you get old, as you get wiser, I found easier ways to do things. Some of the best advice I got when I was first starting out, I graduated from University of Miami, and in their law school, they had a program that allowed you essentially to begin trial work while you were still in law school. And you had professors that would like kind of teach you substantive stuff, and then you kind of went and did an internship. Like that's why I started working at public defender's office. But one of my professors, he gave me this piece of advice, and what he said was, he's like, "Look, do you know how many cases I've resolved by just being nice?
Yeah.
How many cases I've resolved by just being nice? There is something to be said. You don't have to be aggressive to represent your client very well.
Right.
You can just be really nice to people, and you can get a really good result."
Right.
And I've taken that. And so I usually save all the aggression and the trial work stuff for, I don't want, this is the only thing I'm doing an interview, and I don't know how much you're going to watch this.
You're good.
But I don't want people to think, oh my God, this is a vicious litigator who's going to go at me in the trial. I want him to think, this is a really nice guy. He's always on the up and up, and he talks to me really nicely. Yes, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But once we go into trial, my job is clear, and my obligation is to my client, and I'm going to do everything I can to win.
Right.
But I don't think you have to do that until you're actually there. And usually by the time we get to that point, I don't have a situation with opposing counsel where they're like, "I hate you." They're like, "You're good. You're good. I didn't see that this was going to be you, but okay, I see you now."
All right. So Greg, also, I'd love to ask you another question, because you've been a trial attorney for 20 years. When in your life did you decide law school and being a lawyer was for you?
So that actually happened while I was still at the University of Miami. And so I went to University of Miami for undergrad first.
Mm-hmm.
I actually ended up transferring, went to FIU. I graduated from FIU, then I went back to University of Miami for law school. But while I was originally at UM, I remember I was, Miami's a great town, right? And there's a lot of parties.
Of course.
So I was out coming from a nightclub one night with a couple friends of mine, and we were headed back home, back to college. And I was speeding. There's no question about it. But The police officer that pulled me over was probably one of the most I don't know who he is. I don't remember the ticket. I don't remember the guy. But it was one of the most aggressive situations I've ever been in my life. And I mean, in like today's world where we can see a lot of stuff on video, you know, it haunts me just a little bit because maybe it was much more dangerous situation than even I thought it was.
Right.
But having gone through that experience, I mean, I ended up only getting a ticket. But
Right.
having gone through that experience, even though he apparently really, really wanted to take me to jail, which is a good thing he didn't because, you know, I need to do the whole law thing.
Right.
But I just vowed in that moment, like, because you know, I was recently from Jamaica too. I just, you know, I don't know if I said that. I was born in Jamaica. I came up here for
Very
college.
cool.
Like, here I am. But
Very
so as you know, as an immigrant, I didn't know what this all meant. I didn't know what he was saying. I didn't know why he was threatening to do what he was saying he was going to do, and I felt very vulnerable. And I felt, you know, it's just I don't know anything, and I'm just at the mercy of whatever is going to happen to me.
Absolutely.
And that's the moment. That's when it happened, and I said I'm not going to be in that position ever again. And I don't know, law school followed.
Awesome. Well, what a unique experience. And I think so relevant for what we've seen the past few years, especially where technology has caught up to be able to show us, you know, this huge issue of racial prejudice and police misconduct. I mean, for you, do you feel any kind of vindication that you chose the right field, having seen nationally that your experience wasn't isolated?
Well, yes. The only drawback is, and I mean, you know, much thanks to people like Benjamin Crump who are right at the forefront of the battle. So, you know, but you know, while I was in law school, I'd say yes. The answer to that question is yes,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things that you can do to help. And
Right.
like one of the things that I did in law school was we had a program. We were going to the jails once a week on Fridays, and we just talked to the kids. Now, of course, we couldn't give, we're still law students, we couldn't give legal advice, but we could point to cases. You know what I mean? We could talk about cases and what they meant. We go to the jails on Fridays, and we'd spend time with the kids and we go over cases and kind of educate them a little bit about stuff we learned in law school, without talking about obviously their cases.
Right.
But even something like that, because one of the overriding themes, which is something I tell my clients and something I go on my social media and I talk about, I mean, there is what the law is, and there's what people should do, and then there's a situation that you're in. And it was really important, I think, to kind of explain that being in a certain situation, you have to think about that maybe even more than the fact of what the law is.
Right.
Because like like I had this thing I tell people, like, look, if you find it an uncomfortable situation to tell a police officer you don't want this search, then make it into a story. But like, man, I got this lawyer and he's like really good. And he said, if I ever let you search my stuff, he'd never represent me. And I'm getting him at a really good rate. So I can't do it. Even though I want to, I can't do it because I have to hire.
Right.
And it's just to kind of take the sting out of what you're saying, because that might even make a police officer like, I looked at this guy. And it will take all of that, because I think probably, you know, I'd like to say it was all legal, but you know, I have a son. He's Black. He's 18 years old. He's off to college.
Right.
I've spent more time teaching him how to de-escalate situations than I have taught him how to what the laws are necessarily, because ultimately, you know, the laws come after. We get the calls usually after. At best, we get it during. But you know, usually something has already happened by the time we are going to be in place. So my goal has been to try to educate people on how to avoid or to de-escalate these types of situations. So, you know, you go home, or even if you go to jail, you go to jail and you don't have to make a stop at the hospital, you know, God forbid, somewhere else.
Right.
So it's more of that. So even though I like that I'm in this position where I can kind of talk to people about stuff like this, I think probably where I'd be most effective is as an educator. To be very honest with you.
Well, obviously, educator for not only client. I mean, you've been through a situation yourself involving police that inspired you, but also, you're able to relate to your clients, but also your son. And I think that education will just disperse further for people to be able to hear, because I think it's a really important message, and you've lived it. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really important message for people to hear. Another thing I'd love to ask you, Greg, is if you have any really interesting or fun cases, or maybe not fun, but interesting cases that you've tried over your, 2 decades that you would like to tell us about, that maybe our viewers would find kind of interesting.
Well, yes. I'm going to tell you 2 things. I'm going to tell you about a case, but I'm going to tell you something else first.
Perfect.
I think it's incredibly important to not be afraid to lose. I think that is incredibly important. And I know as a new lawyer, it's also going to be difficult when you're trying your first case, and if you happen to get the L on the first one,
Right.
it might cause you some disdain. But the reason I'm telling you this is because I lost 3 cases in a row at a public defender's office. Not the ones when I was still a law student,
Right.
but once I was out on my own and I'm trying these cases, I lost 3 in a row, and that was really hard.
Mhm.
But I will tell you something. I got really, really good. I got really, really good as a result of that, because I learned the hard way very quickly all the mistakes or all the things that I could have done better, because you do learn more from the mistakes. You do learn more from the losses than you can ever learn from winning. So I'm
Right.
very grateful for that. Now, in terms of interesting cases, I mean, there's quite a few. So I'm going to tell you one, which I think, just because it's fascinating from people who aren't outside the world of the law.
Right.
So I did represent a young man who was charged with possession of, I think, 343 counts or 343 items of child pornography.
Oh, wow.
He was about 20. He was in his early 20s at the time. Now, as you can imagine, the stigma attached with even being charged with something like that is significant. Luckily, he was able to get bonded out, because you don't actually want to sit in jail with those charges. It's very dangerous to be in jail with those charges.
Right.
What was fascinating about the case was, I mean, we as lawyers were charged to, we're supposed to go in, we're supposed to represent this client regardless of what they're charged with, because every single person is entitled to a defense.
Under the Constitution, it's a constitutional right. We're defending their rights. Absolutely.
Right. If we decide that he doesn't need a lawyer, then we're at a place of fair trial, then let's hang him, which is not where nobody wants to be.
No.
So, and this case, I think, illustrates that very well, because when you're an attorney, one of the things you have to be able to do is you have to be able to learn the area in which you're going to practice. So even though it's a criminal defense area, and I know all about criminal defense work, there is also this computer related element to this charge, and how this information travels from one computer to another computer, and how the government might be tracking those particular images and how they get where they get.
Right.
That part wasn't so much of an issue in this case, even though we had to understand that from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
What became an issue was my client lived in a household with more than one person, right? He lived in there with a relative, and there were multiple computers.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one computer that accessed certain information, the child pornography.
Right.
And what they did is, because they actually seized all the computers. They seized all the computers together. And so what they did was they were able to determine that when somebody was accessing that information, compared with when somebody might have been accessing, like logging into school to do homework,
mm-hmm.
or going in to check something on Facebook, and so on and so forth. Well, through that process, what we actually discovered was that, number one, don't ever trust just because they said, hey, listen, we looked and this is what it says. Don't trust that.
Right.
Don't ever trust that. It's too easy to go to the easy way. So after checking and double checking, what we found was like, wait 1 second. Even though this computer is identified as our client's, or somebody identified as our client's computer, there's a lot of things that you missed in terms of what was being checked when this thing was being accessed.
Right.
And that has nothing to do with our clients.
Right.
Which raises a very serious question.
Right.
Now, that's all fine and good, and it was good to find out that information, but that's not the end of the story, because it just makes you as a criminal defense attorney, you're like, oh my God, this guy's facing multiple life terms.
Of course.
And no, he's facing a lot of time. I know I have a situation where I think he might actually be innocent. Like, he might not have actually done any of this stuff.
Right.
I know it looks really bad. I know the prosecutors over there thinking, I just charged somebody with this much, but you're not going to get me to just dismiss. So
right.
What we ended up doing is we had to file a comprehensive and exhaustive motion to show that what they had done was unreliable. And that was difficult in and of itself. But the real difficult part was explaining to a judge exactly what was happening, how software like this worked, and how that interacted with the legal environment, and why legally we could not rely on this.
Right.
And what ended up happening on that case, and this is why I said this is a real life type of scenario, and it's not as wonderful. It's not a dismissal. It's not everybody won.
Right.
What we ended up doing was we argued that motion when the trial had already begun. Meaning the jury had already been selected. The judge didn't rule yet, but said, hey, it looks like I'm going to have to rule in favor of the defendant. Judges do this from time to time, unless you guys can work something out.
Right.
And so what we ended up working out was, instead of him going to prison and facing all that time, we actually ended up giving him a plea, probation, 5 years, no conviction, no registration as a sexual predator. And he actually pled to 1 count of child abuse.
Wow.
No, the thing is, could we have just gone on the motion and just won? Maybe.
Right.
But then there could have been an appeal or something.
Of course.
Or it might not have gone that way. Or he might have, we don't know.
Right.
So, it's one of the tough situations. Like, in serious charges like this, sometimes you end up in a situation where we're like, look, this is considering you're not going to be convicted, and it's not going to affect the rest of your life, really. It just, you're going to have, you can almost, I don't think you can actually expunge the, or seal the child abuse charge.
Right.
But at least it's not the other charge, and at least you're not a predator, and at least all this stuff. But it was through that process, I think the reason why we got that deal was because through that process, we started saying, there might be another target here that you guys missed. And then that's what we got to deal. So, it's great to be able to try the cases, but sometimes it can get really technical, it can get really complicated. And then all of a sudden you have to learn a whole bunch of stuff about computers. And just for reference, this is probably like 15 years ago.
Oh, wow. Even stuff has evolved significantly since then on computer and access and metadata and IP address tracking, all of that. So absolutely.
Right. Yeah, what I'd say is, like, being in the future now and looking back, it was surprising how much technology, people should be afraid, how much technology government has at its disposal to track stuff.
Right.
That was 15 years ago. I can't imagine what they can do now. So, stay on the straight and narrow. Or
right.
I call it.
But what a fascinating, story for attorneys to listen to, because if you're looking at your evidence and you're thinking, my client is facing all of these charges, but if you understand the evidence and whether that evidence correlates to the complaint and the charges, sometimes, there are a lot of different areas this case could go, and you have to be able to be prepared for each one. I think that's really good advice on a real life case that you had, where you were able to get a more favorable outcome for your client, but also because the state's case obviously had some holes in it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
There was, for sure. It was a difficult one, because look, it's halfway. It's an inside joke for criminal defense attorneys. I think we don't ask our clients if they did it.
Right. We don't want to know.
Generally don't. It sounds like whatever. It's not really that important to me. It's what's important is whether or not I can defend how best I can defend your case. But that one, the scariest thing for a defense attorney, though, is when you have a client and you know, or you have a really strong feeling in your gut that this person did not do this, but the evidence looks horribly against them. Those are really the tough cases. And I don't know whether I've had a lot of cases like that. And I'm not a fan of this. It's not like I want to have cases like that, but those are usually the ones that I've ended up having to try. And I mean, they're terrifying. And that's why I'm so grateful I lost those 3 cases, because if I didn't, I don't know if I'd be as good as I am today.
Right. I love that advice. You know, you learn sometimes a lot more from your losses than you ever will your wins, because you know where you can learn and correct yourself. And I found that as a trial attorney, like, you know, you think you're going in with this infallible argument and, you know, you think you can do no wrong. And then all of a sudden, surprise. And you're like, well, I need to prepare better next time.
Like what you said. I mean, what cases that the ones I'm not expecting to? Which please going to fall apart? The easiest one, you know?
Right.
It's always like this, you know. Oh, I'm definitely going to win this motion. No, the judge just found a case last night that they didn't tell you about, and no, big surprise for you.
Right.
So that is the law. That's generally how it goes.
I love it. I mean, that is exactly how it's been for me too. It's like the cases I'm like, oh, this will settle in 2 months. 3 years later, we're in front of a jury arguing. So here you go. Well, Greg, it has been so wonderful having you on here. And then I'd also like you to tell us about your social media presence, because I know you have one, and I'd love you to share with our viewers your @ sign or where they can follow you. Okay. So go ahead.
Sure. So I am at the Mcfarlane firm. That's THEMCFARLANE. At the Mcfarlane firm for Instagram. I believe it's at Mcfarlane Firm PA on Facebook. It's 877 Greg Law on TikTok. So
perfect. Well, we'll throw all your handles up. Don't worry.
I mean, I'd like to say that if you search Greg Mcfarlane and the Mcfarlane Firm, it should be pretty easy to find.
Well, Greg, thank you for joining us today. It's been fantastic. And again, thank you for everyone who's watched today's lawyer interview. Again, thank you for our sponsor, #LawTejik, and select America's legal elite and media. Connect with LawTejik for custom, innovative, and disruptive branding solutions to accelerate lawyer, law firm authority, and infinite value for today's clients and community on places like Yahoo Finance, Forbes, Entrepreneur Inc., USA Today, and more. Thanks, Greg, and have a wonderful day. And thanks for watching.
Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
It was wonderful. Thank you.